Okay. All right. So Fair Chance was founded in 2002, and it is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Fair Chance's mission is to strengthen the sustainability and performance of community-based nonprofits to achieve life-changing results for children and youth living in poverty. Each year, we select nonprofits whose work aligns with our mission, and we provide them with free, comprehensive capacity building to improve their infrastructure, sustainability, and growth. At Fair Chance, we envision a world where every child succeeds. We have worked with over 120 organizations in DC, and in a very little bit, you will get to hear firsthand from one of our alumni and about the partnership experience and its benefits. But first, I want to tell you about our Pathway partnership, starting with who we partner with. Okay, so the nonprofits that we partner with transform the lives of children, youth, and families by working to achieve outcomes that have proven to be indicators of being on a pathway out of poverty. And our partner organizations and their leaders are at a point where they are ready to invest in capacity building. Okay, so first we select partners who are working towards educational outcomes, such as health and educational health outcomes, health and well-being outcomes, housing and income outcomes, and community outcomes. We also ask that these organizations serve one of these populations. So parents and infants, early, oops, there we go. So parents and infants, see if I can get my highlighter going here so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see, can y'all see my, at least see my pointer? So I'll just go ahead and talk about them. So we serve, we want our partners to be serving parents and infants, early childhood, childhood adolescents, or young adults up to age 24. So it is not a requirement that you work on the specific outcomes here in purple, but we do want you to be working in one of the domains on the left, so education, health and well-being, housing and income, and community, and be serving one of these populations on the top. Okay, this tells you two things. So we are looking for organizations that are working with children and youth, or parents and guardians who are experiencing poverty in DC. So all of your participants do not have to be living in poverty, but you do have to know how many are. And you don't have to be an organization whose mission specifically addresses one of these domain areas, but your programs do have to work towards participants' outcomes in these areas. So in other words, your mission can be about music or dance or painting, as long as the arts are just the vehicle through which you are improving academic outcomes or physical health, for example. Okay, so the second point about who we partner with is about readiness and timing. So how many of you are familiar with the concept of the nonprofit organizational life cycle? And if you are, great, I cannot see you all because of the way that I'm recording. But the main point is that the nonprofit organizational life cycle image here is depicting a generalized trajectory of many nonprofits, starting with an idea and then growing to the organization, and later moving into stage 4 here, where the organizations need to figure out if it is still meeting the needs of the community and can continue to be sustainable. And if not, then the organization needs to renew itself. So going back to stage 2 here, or close. This image also depicts the types of capacity building that is needed at the different stages. So Fair Chance capacity building partnership programs are designed for organizations that are at stage 2 and ready to invest in infrastructure development. This is why our partnership eligibility requirements includes criteria such as having programs that have been running for at least 1 year. And our partnerships are not about helping you create your programming. They are about helping you build your infrastructure. And because the infrastructure needs are different for organizations that are moving out of stage 1 and entering stage 2 versus organizations that have been developing their infrastructure and are in the middle of stage 2 or towards the end of it, we offer 2 different partnership opportunities. So the Pathways partnership, which we're focused on today, and the Path 6 partnership. are the two that we offer. So questions so far about Fair Chance or about who we partner with or anything that has been said so far?
I have a question. So if just thinking about what you just said around the two partnerships of the Praxis and the Pathways. So if you start in the, once you complete the Pathways partnership, can you then go straight into the Praxis, or is some of the same information covered? Like how would that work if the organization, right now we needed the Pathways, but then wanted to move to the Praxis?
Thank you. Anjali, would you like to respond to that?
Sure, that's a great question. So it's all about the timing. You can, when you finish, you can apply for the Praxis partnership at the next cycle. So while the Pathways partnership is offered at the same time every year, the Praxis partnership actually moves. So it could be that there's like a couple of months lag. It could be that there's even more than 6 months, depending on the timing of the partnerships. So for example, right now, we have just finished our Pathways partnerships, and we're going to be starting the next cohort in October. But the Praxis partnership is continuing on and ends in September, and the next one won't start until February. So it's all about the timing, but yes, that is how it's ideally to work, that you can go from one, take a little bit of time, and then join the other one.
Thank you, Anjali. Any other questions about this segment so far? Okay, so I will actually hand it over to Anjali, who is the Director of DC Programs here at Fair Chance, and let her share with you more about both Pathways and the application process. And I will stop sharing, Anjali, so if you want to share your presentation, you can.
Thank you. Okay, let me just get this working here. Okay. So I think everyone can see my screen now. So the Pathways partnership is focused on shoring up the most fundamental parts, aligning your people, money, and programs to strengthen your nonprofit. We assess organizations and review and discuss commonly used practices in each of these 4 areas: board development, fundraising, program evaluation, and resource alignment. And we focus our work for the remainder of the partnership on these two of these areas based off of the assessment. If you go to our website under the description of the Pathways partnership, these 4 areas are listed, and there are hyperlinks that take you to a page that lists what our capacity building work can look like in our partnerships in each of these areas. So if you note that the Pathways partnership capacity building areas are marked with a plus sign when you go there, because they list all of our areas that we work in both programs, but the plus sign are the ones that are specific to Pathways. And I think we've put that link into the chat. So if you wanted to access that, you can bookmark that page too, so that you can always go back to it. And throughout our entire partnership, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Throughout the entire partnership, we focus on your leadership development. It is a big component of the Pathways partnership. And our goal really is to increase your understanding and make sure that executive directors feel confident in leading their organizations in the 2 areas that we work in. So our Pathways partnership is a program consisting of elements of capacity building that are proven to be effective. We start our partnerships, as I mentioned, with an organizational assessment that helps us create a customized work plan that establishes the goals that the executive director, the board representative, and the Fair Chance capacity building specialist will be working together throughout the partnership to achieve. Even though our capacity building partnerships are free, our partnerships do require a considerable investment of the leadership's time. We expect that executive directors devote 8 hours per week throughout the duration of the partnership to doing the work needed to achieve the goals mutually agreed upon in the work plan. Fair Chance capacity building specialists also devote 8 hours a week to that work. Throughout the partnership, the executive director and capacity building specialists meet virtually every week for about 2 of those 8 hours. And if board development is an area that we work in together, your board chair or a designated board member will also need to devote about 2 to 3 hours per week for about 3 months during the partnership. And for anyone who may have applied in the past, this is the first of a couple of new improvements that we've made to the Pathways program. Throughout the partnership, there will be cohort learning opportunities, times when we will be bringing cohort executive directors and others as needed together to learn and share around specific topics. Last year, the Pathways executive directors did leadership development work using Brene Brown's Dare to Lead book. And we held a workshop on the board's role in fundraising for all of the cohort's executive directors and board members. And because we believe in honoring and celebrating all of our hard work, we hold a small get together at the end of the partnership to celebrate. And after the partnership, we keep in contact. There's an annual survey that we ask our partners to complete so that we can tell the story of the impact of our work. As a Fair Chance partner alumni, you get continued access to some additional opportunities for continued capacity building support through our network services. Our network services, with that, we maintain an executive director listserv so that executive directors can ask questions and share resources with one another. A couple of times a year, we have an executive director learning community that's led by our executive director and focuses on topical issues pertaining to nonprofits. And we also offer pro bono legal counsel provided by Hogan Lovells. You get access to these services during your partnership, as well as after when you're an alumni of the program. In terms of what to expect from our partnership, capacity building is a term that gets used a lot, but can mean different things. The Fair Chance Pathways partnership is a type of capacity building where you get someone by your side, a coach, a thought partner, someone to help you navigate the things that are needed to make your organization function well. Some important things to understand about Pathways is that Fair Chance's capacity building really is done in partnership with the executive director, and as I mentioned, a board representative, so that not only is the work designed and tailored to the unique needs of your nonprofit, but also so that your leadership will have the knowledge, skills, and confidence needed to build and use the systems, tools, and processes after the Fair Chance partnership has been completed. Partners work one-on-one with one Fair Chance capacity building specialist for the entire duration of your partnership. So you get a capacity building specialist who really gets to know your organization inside and out. But that capacity building specialist also has the resources and support of Fair Chance's whole team behind them. So you're getting expertise not only of your capacity building specialist, but also the other Fair Chance staff and our own development department and communications department and other folks that we rely on. We really do understand small nonprofits, which is why our services are free and customized. We know that a nonprofit industry best practice may not actually be a best practice for your small organization. There are also some things that our partnerships are not. For those of you who may have worked with consultants, please note that we are not consultants, we are capacity builders, which means that we don't do the work for you, we do the work together. The success of any partnership is dependent on how much the executive director and the board representative put into our work together. This is why timing is something that's so important for you to consider before applying. Executive directors should ask themselves, do you plan to be focused on working on your organization's systems, infrastructure, procedures, and policies from October to May? Does that fit in with the work that's already on your plate? Is learning and working collaboratively in a virtual setting the right setting for you? Do you have a board member who's available to work on board development during the partnership? One last thing to consider about timing is that if your organization is in financial crisis, this may not be the right time for a partnership. We found that when executive directors have to be focused on keeping their doors open, it's really hard to also have the bandwidth to focus on capacity building and building infrastructure in other areas. So the partnership is also not a way for you to get someone to do some of the things on your plate that you may not like doing. Our capacity building specialists are here to support you and to make getting those things done easier by having a coach, a guide, a sounding board, but we don't do the work for you. We do it with you. And while we will engage your board and staff in the work as needed, depending on what we're working on, you cannot delegate the partnership work to them completely. Right. So just wanted to share that while there are many capacity building opportunities out there in the DC area for nonprofit organizations, there are not many like ours in terms of the time commitment, the one-on-one relationship, the expertise and community, and the cost, because you can't really beat free. But there is the time and the hard work that we ask you to pay into this partnership. And we know that it pays off in a multitude of ways. And you can see that from the impact of our partnership. 100% of our 2020 cohort executive directors shared that they are stronger leaders and their organizations grew in their ability to improve the lives of children, youth, and families as a result of their Pathways partnerships. Our alumni say it best, so I'm going to pause to give you a moment to read some of the quotes on this slide rather than have me read them to you. Okay. Some key points just to sort of summarize and go through, since that was a lot of information that I just shared. The partnership is 8 months. It starts in October and ends in May. It focuses on board development, fundraising, leadership development, program evaluation, and resource alignment. It's up to 8 hours per week, 2 hours of which is with your capacity building specialist in a virtual working space. Board members actively engaging in board development work with a capacity building specialist for about 2 to 3 hours per week for about 3 months. And just to note that we are planning on conducting this partnership virtually. The expectation is that both the capacity building specialist and the executive director or board representative has the technology and will reserve the time to work together virtually and collaboratively. There's independent work assignments between sessions. There's also participation in the partnership cohort-based activities. Like I mentioned, the leadership development activities or some workshops that we have for the cohort, as well as responding to our evaluation surveys. Those are also things that we make requirements of the partnership. While many of the organizations in the Pathways partnership are smaller, usually they are relying more on contractors than paid full staff. Many of them have budgets under $200,000. Nonprofits all develop and are funded differently. So we have had Pathways partners that have larger budgets and more staff, and that also needed to create or rebuild strong foundations in board development, fundraising, program evaluation, and resource alignment. So if you're not sure if the Pathways partnership meets your capacity building needs, you should definitely email us and schedule a consultation with one of our staff. And by June 1st, we will also have a link on our website where you can automatically schedule with us, just to make it easy. We don't want you to struggle in figuring anything out about our application process or which partnership might be right for you. We are definitely available to answer any questions that you might have. And we're also available today. So my next question is, do you have any questions about any of the information that I just reviewed?
I actually do. Thank you for this information. In terms of organizations that are functionally sort of startup organizations, I understand, your guidelines about resources being somewhat secure and not being, sort of in a position where you're struggling to, you're in financial crisis, is I think the term you use. But can you give some general guidelines around like what does that startup newly funded organization, look like, the profile of it, just so, to try to make some decisions on our end.
Sure. We do have some requirements that speak to kind of the how far out of startup you might need to be as you think about capacity building and what our capacity building partnership can do. I think the first one is that your organization has to have had programming operating for at least a year. We also ask that your executive director have been in place for at least a year. We don't require that your executive director is someone who's paid. It can be someone who's volunteer. So there are some points where we recognize that funding is not what drives and getting into this partnership. There are many different organizations that work with very little money, but can still provide programs because their structure is relying heavily on volunteers. So we don't go by a budget size or whether or not you consider yourself in startup phase or things like that, but we have certain requirements in place, like you have to have a 501c3, you have to have been operating for a year, and those types of things. Does that help answer your question, Melody?
It does. It gives me, hope that, but I also probably need to have an individual consultation, but I thank you for that information.
Absolutely. Any other questions that folks have? Okay. Well, I am gonna turn it over to Bemene to get us started with our very special guest speaker.
Thank you, Anjali. And you can continue sharing your screen if you wish. Thank you. All right. We have amazing capacity building specialists here at Fairchance. And I have the privilege of working with Sarita Kamara, who is the Pathways Capacity Building Specialist. So Sarita came to Fairchance with over 15 years of experience working with small, mid-sized, and large organizations in the nonprofit, government, and quasi-public arenas in the areas of organizational development, change management, systems and process improvement, and leadership development. So I'm going to turn it over to her so that she can introduce you to Tyree Moore.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bemene. I have the great pleasure of introducing one of my graduating partners. May I call him an alumni now? I think I can safely do that. Tyree Moore is the founder of Soul Track Outdoors. He is an intersectional environmentalist, a mountaineer, and just some of his accolades as a mountaineer. He's climbed Denali 2 times and Kilimanjaro, just to name a couple things. Tyree is an adventurer, a world traveler, and considers himself an outdoor activist. He is a National Outdoor Leadership School instructor, and in 2021, just this year, he was recently named an emerging leader by Princeton University. So you all are in for a treat, and I guess I hand it back over to Bemene, who's going to ask us some questions about the partnership in action.
Thank you, Sarita, and thank you, Tyree, for being here with us today. So I'll just get started asking you questions, and I'm excited to hear some of your answers. Okay, so I guess Tyree, if you want to tell us a little bit, why did you apply for Fairchance and what did you hope to achieve?
Yeah, so when I first started Soul Track about 3 years ago, Fairchance immediately was something that was constantly put on my radar by a lot of my mentors, other folks that sort of were in the nonprofit sector. And after about a year or so of sort of running the organization, it seemed like a really good time to start to figure out like how to well, for me as a leader, just to sort of seek out resources to really help me sort of settle in my role. So it was my first time sort of leading an organization. And so just wanting to understand like what like from a like much well-rounded capacity, like what tools did I need, and so like what I needs to be doing in my role to sort of really, kind of further the success of the organization. And so I think that naturally, even more so once people started to really see this idea come to life and they sort of seen the organization become a thing, they were like, you really need to reach out and think about like the Fair Trans Partnership. And so I did, and then just hearing a little bit more information, I was like, yeah, constant, like a lot of things that I kind of heard about or like thought about, and just like where our organization needed to grow would come up with our board. It seemed like a really good fit to really sort of help me just start to think a bit more about like the role that I play. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but I was really focused a lot on just like the programming, right? Like what we did as an organization, but didn't really start thinking too much about, it's like the expansion of the organization, how we brought in revenue for the organization. And I think that Fair Chance started to help me think a little bit more about like all aspects of like how to sort of see the success of the organization grow beyond just like what the programs look like.
Thank you, Tyree. That's wonderful. Was it difficult to find time for the partnership, and how did you make time for it?
I would say, I don't know. So maybe I also had a very unique experience because it was during the pandemic. So it wasn't really super demanding from a like accessible aspect. Like we didn't have to like come meet each other in person, which I believe is like sort of the normal sort of practice of Fair Chance. So for me, it was relatively easy to sort of maintain my schedule with Sawida. Like it's almost just like any other sort of thing on my calendar that's sort of recurring. We met every Wednesday. It was something I sort of looked forward to. We had like sort of homework assignments. And so I thought initially that it would be hard to keep up with, but it almost became sort of really routine for us to sort of check in. It almost felt weird if we didn't. And I will say as the, like sort of in this weird time that we're in right now, where we are sort of transitioning back to somewhat of a normal, and like Soul Track right now is sort of really hectic and has a lot of things going on. It's starting to become a little harder to just sort of maintain like the schedule that I've like sort of gotten used to during this sort of virtual world. But generally speaking though, it's like after maybe 3 or 4 times of meeting with her, you just sort of get used to sort of that being like a ongoing thing. So I would say it wasn't as hard as it may sort of first come off as.
Awesome. Okay. And what service would you, let's say, what are the top 2 to 3 ways that the partnership helped? How is Soul Track Outdoors and you as its leader different today as a result of the partnership?
Yeah, I can probably talk for a while about this, but I would say one, just like I was saying earlier, I had, prior to my role as an executive director, I worked sort of over programming for City Kids and just like with other nonprofit organizations. So that was kind of my expertise, right? Like knowing how to sort of make things come to life from a programming aspect, but being able to work with Sawida especially on an ongoing basis like that, really constantly helped me think about other aspects of Soul Track, not just like what we were doing as a program, but how we evaluated those things through surveys or like check-ins with our participants, especially fundraising. I think that was something that was a huge interest of mine coming into the partnership, which is like, how do we fundraise? At the time, I was a volunteer. I did not have any, I was not being paid for my role. And we were like sort of really surviving off of just like the general engagement from the community. And so just really starting to just really create these foundations, both from from a resource aspect, like how do we seek out partners? How do we seek out other resources, whether that's pro bono work or any little aspect of like how we can be supported, was extremely helpful for us, because I think that we had a really good thing going in terms of like what we were doing as an organization, but we were like, didn't have any support, like, right? Like we were just sort of functioning. We were young, we're still really young, but I think the Fair Chance Partnership really helped us start to really bring in the right resources and just like structure to really help create an argument for funding, as well as like to bring on new support for the organization. And then also I would say another huge thing is that one of the biggest things coming into this role was just like, it's like managing volunteers, whether that's at the board level or just like at the programming level. And Fair Chance really helps create this other level of accountability, or just like yeah, just like an additional level of accountability over your organization, right? Like, so sometimes it can be really hard for me in my role to say, hey, we need to get and this done with volunteers and like, really get some, steam behind everyone. But I think that knowing everyone sort of seeing me in this partnership, working with the capacity building specialist on a weekly basis, and knowing that, I'm like really in a space to really help grow the organization, it was something I could leverage often to say like, hey, I'm working with Sawida. We're really looking for these things in the next month or so. How can we now these are the things that we need from you all. And it sort of really helped other people like sort of hop on board and get just as engaged and like, get on the same track as I was to really sort of help the organization move from where we were. And so I would say that that was also really helpful. And then lastly, Sawida knows, but I would call her for a variety of different things, like completely separate from like the topics at hand that we were focused on for that given month or whatever, just as sort of a resource or just like another voice, because I think after sort of spending so much time with her, she really understood the organization pretty thoroughly and understand how I sort of operate or function. And so it was just helpful to sort of get her insight as someone that was really in tune with like where I was and where the organization is currently. So.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so then what advice would you give to someone considering applying for the partnership?
My advice would be to really come into the partnership extremely transparent. Like I think that for me at first I felt like, oh, like I need to feel like I like have all of these things together, or like, we need to be at this certain in a certain position as an organization to really sort of meet the requirements, or just like feel like we're just like suitable to be here, right? And I think that that even showed like sort of in the partnership, you take like a pre-assessment and then a post-assessment, and just even reading through like how I assessed our organization earlier on versus how I assess it now. It just was one of those things where I was almost too afraid to really recognize where our organization was earlier on, and just like saying like, yeah, we need a lot of help here. We need a lot of work in these aspects, whether it's like from a board engagement level or from a fundraising level or from a, like evaluation level. I would say, oh yeah, we have all of these things in place, or like we're working on it. But in reality, like we had a lot more work to do. And I think that when you can be a lot more transparent with Fair Chance, it really allows them to sort of really dig a lot deeper into like how they can help support you. And I think that that was something I eventually learned, that it takes some time, but you realize that Sawida is like, or whoever your capacity building specialist is really trying to understand what the need is, so that she can really sort of support that as much as possible, and not sort of a question and just to sort of evaluate you, but more so like, I'm asking these so that I can really figure out what needs to get done, so that you leave this with the right tools, right? Like we may not like solve it completely right here, but at least leaving this, that you'll have everything in place to sort of help work towards like where you're trying to go. So yeah, I would say transparency is key.
That sounds like great advice, and I'm certain that Anjali would agree with that 100%, and she'll go over the application process in a little bit. But first, I actually want to ask you a question, Sawida, to hear a little bit about your perspective. So can you tell us about the capacity building specialist role in the partnership?
Sure, thank you for that. And also thank you, Tyree, for all the things that you've just shared. My role, as a capacity building specialist, I specifically approach that role as someone who is coming in to support the organization's leaders, whether that is the executive director, whether that's the board members, in really thinking through their analysis of the organization's strengths and its challenges. And that's not just exclusively to the partnership areas. Yes, we do an assessment that takes about 2.5 months, and we do a deep dive in the 4 capacity building areas that we work in Pathways. But I'm always kind of at that intersection of like, let's analyze what's going on in this organization. What is working, what isn't working? So that's one of the first ways I feel my role is as a capacity building specialist, is to kind of support this analysis. And then building from that, the next place I feel that I lend my support is really in the learning. After we've, kind of analyzed the organization, is really kind of learning about what are some of the best practices that are out there in the nonprofit space, or just even if you're borrowing from other spaces. But beyond that, what are the optimal practices and strategies that are going to align with your organization's culture, your values, and those type of things? And I really try to facilitate a learning process that is like, here are some of the things that other people are doing. Here's what this, National Council of Nonprofits or whoever is saying to do, but let's really think through how to tailor that and how to fit your organization's culture and values so that it's not necessarily just best practice, but what is optimal practice for your organization. As part of that, there's a lot of thought partnership, there's a lot of resource sharing, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of conversation as part of that, which is another big thing that the CBS role has to offer is, again, that thought partnership. And I also want to say, and Tyree's already touched on it, so he's kind of stealing my thunder a little bit, but that my role also as a CPS is to support the partnership by creating accountability. And that is accountability not only to just the partnership work when we decide, okay, we're going to work on these 2 areas in the partnership engagement, but also I feel like my role is also to create accountability to the desired strategic direction or vision of the organization. So when we do the assessment, I always ask, where do you want to grow? How do you want to grow in this area as an organization or as a leader? So I see myself as someone who's championing, but also I'm challenging in a supportive way in terms of creating that accountability, both with the executive director, but also with board members as well. So it's not just the executive director that this type of support is being extended to.
Thank you, Sarita and Kyrie. It sounds like this has been a beautiful experience for the both of you. Kyrie has felt very supported and in all the ways that you intended to support. So that's really wonderful. I'm gonna invite Anjali back in just a moment so that she can go over the application process. But if anyone has questions specifically for Tyrie and Sarita, please jot those down or put it in the chat. And towards the end, during our Q&A segment, they will both be on and available to answer those questions. And you can also choose to simply speak up during that time and ask your questions to them as well. Okay. Anjali, would you like to come on and share with us about the application process?
Sure. And we will have another opportunity to answer questions if folks are typing them in right now. So I'm just going to go forward and talk to you guys about the application process and share some tips with you as well. So we hope that our application provides a space for you to reflect on who you are, what you do, and how you need to grow and develop and strengthen and improve, both as an executive director and as an organization. Please keep in mind that you're not applying to Fair Chance for funding. We don't give you any money. So you don't have to sell us a shiny organization with amazing results. In fact, if you're too perfect, we're going to be asking ourselves if you really need some capacity building specialist support. So we ask for clarity in the application. We're not looking for buzzwords or fancy prose. We really want to understand more about your organization, your programs, and your capacity building needs. And with the more clarity you can do that with, the better your application will be. We also want to know what makes you unique. Every nonprofit is special in some way. So help us understand why your organization or program is unique and in how you approach your work, who you serve, how you meet an unmet need, or whatever it is that makes your organization so great. Also, as Tyrie mentioned, transparency is a big thing for us. We hold what you tell us in confidence at every stage, starting with the application. And we don't share any information from your application outside of our selection team, which is made up of members of Fair Chance's leadership team and our program staff. So you don't have to hide all your pain points. In fact, we need you to share those with us to truly help us understand your capacity building needs. Another element of transparency is about helping us understand your finances. We touched a little bit on this earlier. Having debt, a deficit, or cash flow issues does not necessarily reduce your chances of selection. But as I mentioned in the expectations section, our model is not designed to help organizations that are in or on the brink of financial crisis, because our program takes time and requires focusing on multiple areas when financial crisis usually demands immediate action and singular focus. So if you are wondering about your financial situation, please, explain it to us as best as you can, because numbers don't always tell the whole story. And we want to make sure that we understand the whole story. Also remember that this really is about partnership for us. The work that we do with you is done in partnership rather than achieving things for you. So when you're responding to parts of the application about your capacity building needs, emphasize what you want to learn or develop in order to achieve your goals. And that will help us get a better understanding of your capacity building needs. If you apply for a Pathways partnership and we determine through the selection process that Praxis is the partnership that best meets your needs, we will automatically move your application for consideration to the next Praxis cohort, which, as I mentioned earlier, applications for that partnership are due in October. If you're already thinking that you may be a better fit for Praxis and have some questions, you can sign up for a consultation, which will be available through our website in June. So the biggest general tip is start early, save your work, and applications are due July 1st by 5 p.m. Let's see. This is all of the sections of the application. And if you've applied for a Fair Chance partnership before, you'll notice some different things this time. And I'll point some of those out along the way. This year, we changed our application process in order to make it more accessible for organizations to apply for the Pathways partnership. So we still ask a lot and cover a lot of things, but it's an online form that uses some intelligent design. So some questions only appear based on how you've answered previous questions. Additionally, the second stage of our selection process is an interview with the executive director and the board chair or representative. And we've structured those as a place where we will gather more information. So there's less that we're asking you to write about in the application. So just to begin with, in the application, we provide a link to a document that has frequently asked questions concerning the application platform. And we also have a staff person who can assist you if you have any technical challenges using our online application. The first section of our application is fairly straightforward. It is asking for your contact information, and it goes over the eligibility requirements and makes sure that, that you're actually eligible to apply. The bigger section here is that what's included is the 2 priority considerations for the Pathways program, and they are written here on the slide. And they really reflect our commitment to our mission and to advancing racial equity in the nonprofit sector in DC. So you can still be a partner even if you don't meet either of these priority considerations. And also, just because you meet a priority consideration or even both of them, that doesn't mean that you will automatically get a partnership. So keep those in mind. The other sections of the application, there's an organizational overview where we ask you 3 narrative questions. Basically, what's your mission statement? What issues impacting children, youth, and families experiencing poverty in DC does your organization strive to address? And then share 3 recent accomplishments. One of the bigger changes to our application is in the program information section. If your website represents your programs well, we will go and read it. So you do not need to write anything in the application about your programs. But there is space for you to tell us about any changes or updates to your programming that may not have been made it to your website yet. And if you don't have your programs represented on your website in a way that you want to share, there's also space for you to tell us about your programs in the application itself. We also ask for some information about who you serve. We ask that you share with us demographics if you have them. If you don't currently collect data, that's okay. Just tell us about who your programs are designed for. Data about how many children, youth, and families living in poverty, and how many of them are benefiting from the works of nonprofits in Fair Chance's network, and where those participants are from in DC, is part of the data that Fair Chance collects from our alumni in order to truly, fully understand the impact of our work and our success in achieving our mission. Therefore, in order to be a partner, you have to be willing to track and share that information in the future if you don't currently collect it. The next section of our application is one of greatest importance. It is where we ask you to tell us about your capacity building needs. And we really hope that you will take time to reflect and describe for us your vision for your organization and what your current capacity building needs are. You can do this, as I mentioned earlier, by either telling us what you'd like to have in place that you don't currently have, or if you don't know what solution you might be looking for, you can describe what's not working currently for you. So for example, you can say that you need a better process for recruiting new board members, or you can say that you have not added any new members to the board since your founding and you want to change that. Those are two different ways that you can describe what your capacity building needs are for us. When completing this section, it is useful to refer back to the web page that we shared in the chat earlier that describes all of Fair Chance's capacity building areas. And the last two sections of our application are pretty brief at this stage. If your organization advances to the next round in our selection process, we'll ask you more detailed questions about your organization's leadership and finances. But for right now, we just want to know, who are your people and how much money did you spend last year and how much do you plan to spend this year? There are several attachments requested. For the required ones, if you have the current information in a format that you used for any other application, feel free to send that in. We don't need to recreate things just for this application. But please make sure that it has all of the requested information included. And this year, for one of the changes we made for Pathways is that all of the requests for financial documents, like your budget, the statement of activities, all of those things are not required. If you already have them, we would love that you submit those. But if you don't already have these documents, we don't want you to feel the need to create one for this application. We'll ask you more questions about your finances in the interview if you're not able to provide us with documents at this stage. There's also a form for your board chair to complete. It's brief, 1 page, and there's a link in the application that you can send to your board chair so that they can access the form and complete it online. In this form, your board chair is asked to identify and provide the contact information for the board member who will be actively working and participating in the partnership if board development is an area that we end up working in. I should also add that I think board development has been an area for almost 100% of our previous Pathways partnerships. So you may want to seriously consider that because oftentimes we are working in board development. After you submit your application, you'll be asked to select 2 interview time slots. The first interview is for both the ED and the board chair or representative. So please confer and sign up for the day and time that works for you both. The second interview is for just the ED. And if you're selected to advance to the next round, these will be the days and times for your interviews. All interviews are being held on Zoom, and we're hoping to have made our final selection by the end of August or early September. And we will notify you then. Who we select for partnership is based on a number of factors, and not all of those factors have to do with you or your application. For example, if the applicant pool this year is really large and Fair Chance's capacity is small, your application may not be as successful this year. But we've had organizations that have received a partnership after applying for 2 years in a row, or even sometimes 3, and some that have applied once and then successfully gotten it the second time years later. So there's lots of ways for you to come into partnership with us. And as I mentioned before, timing is really key to a successful partnership. So if after hearing this presentation, you're interested in partnering with Fair Chance, but not this year, please keep us in mind and keep in touch with us. Make sure that you stay on our outreach list. We offer these partnerships every year. So with that, I am going to open it up for any questions you might have about Fair Chance, our partnerships, our application, or our selection, or questions for Tyree, who is still available to answer things about what the experience is like from an executive director.
And you're invited to, if you don't want to speak on camera, send those questions privately to Anjali, and she'll read it and then respond, or you can choose to, speak yourself. Thank you.
I'll ask a question. I'm wondering, what was it that pushed you into the over toward applying at the end? I heard you say that you had some hesitancy, but ultimately, what made you apply to the program?
Yeah, I would say I ended up applying because I think as an organization we had gotten to a point where we were doing like what we did really well, but we were becoming pretty stagnant or just not understanding where our next sort of like stepping stone was going to be as an organization. And I think that partially that had a lot to do with my lack of knowledge in the role, but as well as sort of the board needing that also like level of accountability as well. And so it just made a lot of sense to sort of lean on experts, right, and sort of like work with Fair Chance, who sort of has a lot of experience working with really young organizations and getting them to a place where they are sort of fully functioning.
Thank you. My follow-up is what size was your organization at the time in terms of staff or otherwise?
Yeah, so it was we were completely volunteer based, so even including myself. So we had no employees at the time. We had a 4 and we were onboarding a 5th board member. And right now we had about 6 volunteers that sort of helped lead a lot of our programs. So, yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions about anything so far?
It's not a question, but I just want to say, Tyree, it's just your passion for what you're doing is just evident and contagious. I get excited to see young people outdoors. We've been able to do some really exciting trips with our own kids that they earn through their academic achievement and participation. So I think travel is such an important piece, and getting outdoors and experiencing new places and new things. So just props to you for what you're doing. It's impressive.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes if anyone has any questions.
Well, I think I will then close us out a little early, which is always nice to get some found time. So thank you, especially on a gorgeous day like today. But we really are here to answer any of your questions. So you have our contact information and you know where to find us. So please reach out if you have any questions. And we are happy to answer them best we can. And I just want to also kind of give a shout out along those lines, Sherry. You know, every year we find new nonprofits that come across our radar screen